Rockets fans, welcome to the Rockets Launch Pod, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets. Oh! Sports Talk 790. Rockets. Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Rockets Launch Pod starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome back to a special playoff episode of the Rockets Launch Pod presented by Clutch Fans. As always, I'm your host, Ben DuBose, joined by Paulo Alves. You can follow me on social media at Ben DuBose, Paulo at Paulo Alves NBA. And as of our recording on this Wednesday, the 15th of April, the Rockets are back at practice today, getting ready for their upcoming first-round playoff series against the Los Angeles Lakers. I predicted it in our last pod, and fortunately, that's the result that came out for the Rockets. Houston finished the regular season at 52-30 in the fifth spot in the West. The Lakers 53-29, the number 4 spot. That does mean you're on the same side of the bracket as the defending NBA champion Oklahoma City Thunder, so you'd likely be playing them in the second round, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Right now, it's more of a celebratory vibe because the Rockets drew a Lakers team that all season long we said was probably the friendliest matchup among their first-round potentials, and now they're missing, at least to start the series, both of their leading scorers in Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves. Not for sure they'll be out the entire series, but at least to start, you're getting an injured version of what was already most likely your friendliest matchup. And when the alternative was the Denver Nuggets, who won the NBA championship just a couple of years ago, have probably the best basketball player in the world in Nikola Jokic, and finished the season with 12 straight wins, I think clearly your odds of winning a playoff series for the first time since 2020 went up a lot by the Rockets drawing the LA Lakers. That's not disrespecting them in any way. They're still a capable team led by LeBron James, one of the all-time greats, and they do still have plenty of shooting, but let's just be real. What the Rockets got on Sunday night was a gift, with the Nuggets playing Nikola Jokic for one half, and other than that, mostly backups against a Spurs team that, other than Wemby, was all out there and playing until deep in the fourth quarter, and somehow, led by Rockets legend David Roddy, the Nuggets got it done and stayed as the 3 seed and holding the Lakers at the 4 while they'll play the Rockets in the first round. So we'll talk about the series today, what needs to go right, what could go wrong. Probably talk a little bit more about what could go wrong because I think everybody acknowledges that on paper, the Rockets are the better team against a shorthanded Lakers squad. ESPN's picks had 11 for the Rockets, 1 for the Lakers. In the betting odds that I've seen, Rockets are something like minus 700, minus 750. So on paper, games are played on the court, not on paper, but at least in terms of what you can reasonably expect going into the series, the Rockets are in an advantaged position. So I'm going to look more today at what could go wrong than what could go right, because honestly, going right is the status quo. The Rockets should be the better team in this series, and Houston closed the season going 9-1 in its final 10 games, so they seem to be peaking at the right time as well. But Paulo, I'll start by looking back just how much of a paradigm shift was what happened Sunday night in terms of, the odds of advancing out of the first round. Obviously, there's now greater expectations. If you were to play the Nuggets, I think you would have been basically playing with house money, going up against a great team without Fred VanVleet, without Steven Adams. Now, all of a sudden, if you lose, it feels like something probably went very wrong for you, and it says something bad about the players, the coach, maybe a combination of the two. There's certainly more pressure now, but there's also more of an opportunity to advance at least to the second round of the playoffs, which we have not done since 2020. So, Paulo, just your general thoughts on what we saw Sunday night and how important it is in the grand scheme.
Yeah, I was a bit confused because heading into Sunday night, I was totally expecting the Nuggets to just tank. And I'm just unsure if they were unable to, because the Spurs were playing De'Aaron Fox late into that game and Harrison Barnes. And so it seems like the Spurs were trying to win, more so than the Nuggets, who sat Jokic at a certain point after he hit whatever 20-25 minutes it was to be eligible for awards. So to me, it seemed like the Spurs were trying to win, but that the Spurs without Wemby are just that terrible that they couldn't beat the Nuggets backups. And I mean, that would fit my narrative, in my opinion, from very early on in the season, which is that Wemby might be, top 3 most impactful players in basketball. Maybe top 2, just behind the guy he was playing against. So going into it, I did not expect it. It is a massive break for the Rockets. I don't think that's surprising anybody. As far as what you said about pressure, I don't think. Well, I think this basically gives everybody a pass. Because if the Rockets had drawn the Nuggets and lost in the first round, I think the organization would have taken like massive heat from fans, from national media. Just, you don't buy into KD and then come out with the same result that you had the year before. Whether or not KD is a win now move doesn't really matter. You have to be at least better than you were before, otherwise why did you make the move? And obviously injuries and that nuance comes into it. But I think for a lot of people that, be overshadowed by the fact that you made a move for KD. The fact that they get the Lakers, which I don't want to jinx it, but it's a free win, right? Unless Luka comes back, it's a free win. It's not looking likely. Just judging by what KJ Redick said, he's doesn't have a timeline for return. That could be gamesmanship for him returning in the middle of the series and it being expected. But there's also reports that diagnostic in Spain of his hamstring was actually more serious than what he was diagnosed with in the US. So just expecting him and Austin Reeves not to play, it's as you said, it's hard to find ways for the Rockets to lose this series, which means that if they do lose this series, heads have got to roll. I don't think there's any. Listen, I've been conservative about major changes throughout the entire offseason, but if they lose this series, that's the type of outcome that gets people fighting. What people? I don't know. But certainly people or major trades would happen if that were to happen. But then again, which means, and this is why it's a pass, which means that you do get to the second round, which you can spin into a successful season. You were better than you were last season, technically. I guess you can spin it as a win, but at the same time, it allows people who were already down on the season to maintain their points, which is, yeah, you got the second round, but, did you really face a worthy opponent in order to get there? Which means that if we are to be objective and put it as much weight into the Lakers being awful as we put into the Rockets getting into the second round, which means that what defines this as a successful season or not going forward is likely how much of a fight they put up in the second round, and God knows maybe they win in the second round, which would be unlikely, but Rockets Thunder just seems to make weird things happen all the time. So yeah, it massively changes what the outlook and what the decisions will be going into the offseason, because it buys the organization a lot of leeway to say, hey, we got to the second round, whether that is with fans, whether that is with national media, whether that is with ownership, did technically improve. And obviously you play who's in front of you. You can't play someone who isn't, so that comes into play as well. And the last point I want to make on the implications is, it's kind of wild that if the Rockets didn't have as mediocre of a season as they did, they would likely face a tougher opponent in the playoffs than they are going to. Like, let's play out a scenario where the Rockets win more games and they are the 4th seed, right? That could mean that Rockets won some of the games against the Lakers, which might mean that the Timberwolves actually surpass the Lakers as well, and the Rockets don't face the Lakers as the 4-5 matchup. Let's imagine the Rockets are the 3 seed instead, and they're likely playing against the Timberwolves. Definitely a tougher matchup. Let's say the Rockets are even better than that, have a terrific season and are the 2 seed. And they're playing when the teams come out of the play-in. If that team happens to be the Warriors, for example, listen, I'm not gonna tell you that. Like, I feel a lot more comfortable with this Lakers series than I would with another Warriors series, even though they are a worse team, and the standings tell you that. But if they were the teams to come out of the play-in, you can't, not have that come into play as well. So, all in all, besides being, maybe even the 1 seed, the Rockets being as mediocre as they were for portions of the season ended up giving them the easiest round one matchup that they could possibly have, which is kind of ironic that in a season where so much has gone wrong, they just got this massive break at the end. And for the record books, knock on wood, it's likely going to show that the Rockets were not a playoff team when Ime Udoka came in. And then first season they increased by 20 wins or something of the sort, but they missed the playoffs. Then third season they are the 2 seed, get knocked out in round 1. And then the year after they are the 5 seed and get knocked out in round 2. And when you look at it without the context, it looks like linear progression throughout his entire time here, which, Ime's job is not depending on that, but it does help you sell that there is linear progression, that the next step is making the Western Conference Finals in a year where a lot of people were making the argument that you were taking a step back. Well, it turns out that objectively you took a step forward, and at the end of the day, what the record books show is how far you got, not who you beat to get there. So yeah, going in, those are my thoughts about how the season ended.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the parallel of the 2025 Warriors series, because let's not act like Houston wasn't owed a break. Last year, they got a terrible draw. That Golden State team relative to the typical 7. So the 7-8 play-in game to determine who will be the 7 in the West was between Phoenix and Portland. Compare those teams to the Golden State Warriors of a year ago. With Steph, Draymond, they traded for Jimmy Butler at the deadline. That was far, far better than the typical 7 seed. And night and day. Go ahead.
You're not scared of the Jalen Green-led Phoenix Suns?
Well, and to peel back the curtain, we're actually recording this before that game goes final, so we'll see if it's actually the Suns or if it's the Trailblazers. But either way,
oh, don't worry. If it's the Blazers, you were going to watch Daniel Diaz shoot 20 free throws in the playoffs. Like, there's no choice about it. Like, especially against the Rockets, he seems to draw even more. So,
but the larger point, it's night and day different than the draw the Rockets got a year ago, which was absolutely terrible for a 2 seed. And, so much of your success or failure comes down to the landscape around you. Like, the Rockets were 52-30 in both years. And I would argue that perhaps the 52-30 this year was more impressive because you did it without Steven Adams and Fred VanVleet. Now, you did have Kevin Durant, so expectations were higher, but knowing what we know now in terms of, Fred and Steven being unavailable for most of the season, DFS not being himself at all for the entire season, to get to 52-30, the same record, speaks to just how good Kevin Durant was, and continued steps forward from young guys, most notably Amen Thompson and Reed Shepherd. Jabari Smith Jr. deserves a shout out as well. So to get to 52-30, it doesn't feel like it because they were the 5 seed, but it's the same record as a year ago. It just so happened that the landscape of the Western Conference, at least at the top, was a little more difficult this year. Well, last year you had, at least in the regular season, a more favorable draw in that there weren't any other great teams other than Oklahoma City. But then when you get to the playoff bracket, the parity came back to bite you, in that you had a ridiculously loaded 7 seed. Well, now you're the 5, but you get a much friendlier draw in the first round, and ultimately it's up to them to take advantage of it. But it's not that they weren't owed a break. They certainly were, because that team last year deserved better and just got a terrible draw. Really, the entire organization and fan base did, because you factor in not only how great the Warriors were as a team, they were 100% going to the Western Conference Finals. If you watched Game 1 against the Timberwolves, they were going to win that series until Steph blew his hamstring, and at that point, everything changed. That was a loaded team, and Rockets got a bad draw, and for the organization and fan base, it was made even worse based on all the baggage that, the Rockets have in their history against that same franchise, even if it was mostly with different teams, different players. So, yeah, the Rockets were due a break. They got one. It's up to them to take advantage of it. And to close the loop on what happened with the Spurs and the Nuggets, it's just, I think in that specific game, it wasn't just not having Wemby. It was also not having Luke Cornett. So there really wasn't much in the way of rim protection. And even though Jokic played only a half, well, for starters, he was great in that half. They also have Jonas Valanciunas. And then I mentioned David Roddy, who by the way, Roddy he needed to be included in the Kevin Durant trade for financial reasons. If he hadn't been, he might have ended up playing for the Rockets this year if they had brought him back on a two-way, given the depth issues they've had at the wing spots, with obviously DFS not being himself. There's a reason Jae'Sean Tate has gotten continued looks. Tari Eason has been hot and cold and missed 15 games early in the year with the oblique. So if the Rockets had kept David Roddy, he might have gotten a chance this year. But regardless, he ended up helping them nonetheless with what he did against the Spurs and with how physical he is against his first team without any rim protection. That's how, even though the Spurs were pushing, they were hitting some threes, they just couldn't stop the Nuggets from getting easy looks at the basket, and that's why they weren't able to put a sustained run together despite playing most of their ones. And I just think I'm stunned at the organizational management by both teams, not so much the players and the coaches, because they're going to maximize what they have on the floor at a given moment. That's what they're trained to do. And honestly, it's not that surprising that a veteran team like the Nuggets that has a system, that has an identity, most of its backups are veteran players that have been around, so they know what they're doing. I thought Bruce Brown was very good in that game as well. It's not the same as when, a tanking team decides to tank and they mostly have super young guys that, don't have any structure, don't know what they're doing, and they're just going to go out there and jack threes and turn the ball over a lot. No, they're still going to play hard. They're going to play together, and so that gives them a fighting chance. But then organizationally, if you want to lose that game, or if you're the Spurs and you want to win it, I don't understand what happened in the days leading up to Sunday, because clearly the lineups that were out there indicated that the Spurs wanted to lose. The Nuggets preferably wanted, or the Spurs wanted to win. The Nuggets preferably wanted to lose, and that's not what happened. The Spurs played Wembanyama on Friday to get to the 65-game mark. They could have easily played him on Sunday and still had let that be the 65th game and then have a week off before the playoffs. Like, I know he was dealing with a rib contusion, but you can't tell me that having 7 days or having 9 days instead of 7 days is all that different. No, they could have waited on Wemby until Sunday and had him to go up against Jokic in the first half. And then with Denver, so Jokic could have played Friday against the Thunder. It was pretty clear that, even though the Nuggets rested a lot of their regulars on Friday, that Thunder team, resting almost its entire roster, had no chance. So you could have gotten the 65th Jokic game out of the way on Friday had you wanted, and that way you wouldn't have had to even play him for 18 brilliant minutes against the Spurs to get to the 65-game mark where he's eligible for awards. You could have gotten that out of the way Friday in a game you were likely to win anyway, because the Thunder clearly weren't trying to win and the Spurs were. But then the cherry on top, the game before that on Wednesday, and this was after, the Rockets were on their streak that had gotten to 8 games in a row. The injuries to the Lakers had happened, so the landscape was pretty known. The Nuggets were down 18 points in the fourth quarter at home to Portland, and they came back and won. They played their regulars, and they extended it for 5 minutes into overtime. So the Nuggets needed just one more loss somewhere along the way to get to the 4 seed that they clearly wanted, and yet they fought back from down 18 against a Portland team that was playing for everything and played 5 extra minutes in overtime as well. So if you're worried about, some people in Denver are spinning it as, after previous years, they're worried about health and trying to make sure their big guns are in optimal form for the playoffs, it would have been so easy to just say, hey, it's not our night. We don't really need the 3 seed, and shut it down when you're down 18. Or at a bare minimum, don't let them play overtime and maybe the Blazers pull away then. It just seemed like not a lot of organizational alignment. And obviously the Rockets are the big beneficiary, going from being a pretty clear underdog against the Nuggets to a favorite against the Lakers. But it just seems like from both a San Antonio perspective and a Denver perspective, this could have been avoided had there been a little more strategic planning in the days before Sunday. I'm very surprised. That's not to say, it's not to take a shot at those two organizations, because they each had a fantastic season, better than the Rockets, quite frankly, but just in the very, micro here and now, I thought they mismanaged that final week, and boy, did the Rockets get a break in a way that a year ago, drawing the Warriors at the 7th seed, they did not. Anyway, let's talk about the Lakers series specifically. And on paper, I love this matchup. I think even though the Rockets went 1-2 against the Lakers in the regular season, the 2 games the Rockets lost were in the middle of March when they were at their low point, and they were still there for the taking with 3 minutes left, and Luka played just transcendent basketball in those 2 games. combined for 76 points on like 50% shooting, just insane efficiency, got them to the finish line. He was MVP mode in those games, and he's not going to be out there to start the series. And if he does come back at some point, he's likely to not entirely be himself, although it certainly would be an emotional lift for the team. Paulo, to your point earlier, I did see a report. Someone pushed back on that Slovenian report of the injury being worse, saying, no, actually it's the same, but it's hard to know. That could be just cover trying to, preserve the illusion that Luka could come back in this series for strategic purposes against the Rockets. Maybe the report was wrong, but it could also be that the correction is to, keep hope alive, so to speak, and to make the Rockets account for more things. Just wanted to acknowledge that there was a pushback to that report, although whether it's actually accurate, I don't know. As far as the matchup without Luka, look, the Rockets were right there, and they dominated the Lakers on Christmas in LA, just looked far more athletic. When they were able to get out and run, it was over. The Rockets had too much length, and the Lakers looked slow by comparison. Now, the one silver lining you can point to, the Lakers should be better defensively without Luka and Reeves, but offensively, I mean, LeBron and shooters is never a bad formula, but a 41-year-old LeBron, asking him to pull that model off 4 times in 7 games, it's a lot. So on paper, the Rockets are the better team. I think Kevin Durant a slightly better year than LeBron, to be expected, because Kevin's 37, LeBron is 41. So I think in terms of the A1s for both teams, you give the Rockets the edge. And then after that, the Rockets might have the next best 5 or 6 players in the series, as long as Luka and Reeves aren't playing. And even if they do come back, they're the 2 leading scorers for Lakers this season, but they're probably not going to be in peak form if they do return. So on paper, the Rockets are the better team. And that's why, as I mentioned off the top, I want to look at what the Rockets could do wrong rather than what they will do or should do right, because the status quo would be them winning this series against a shorthanded Lakers team. Houston should be the better squad, and they enter with momentum, having won 9 of their last 10 games. With that said, the Lakers, they're not bad. Even after those 2 injuries, the Lakers finished the year on a 3-game winning streak, average margin of victory about 20. Now, I know it was largely against teams playing for nothing, but still, they were able to get wins. These are competent NBA players. LeBron is incredibly smart. He's still one of the most talented players of all time. They've got plenty of shooters. They lose some scoring punch without Luka and Reeves, but there's enough there that if the stars align, especially at home, they could give the Rockets a run. Like, crazy things happen in single game samples. And as far as what I'm worried about going into this series, there's a macro concern I have and a micro concern. And I'll start with the macro, because I think it plays into, what may happen on a micro level. The macro concern I have, I don't think it's a given that Luka and Reeves are out for the series. I think it's possible. Maybe Reeves is a little more likely from just reading the tea leaves, what's out there. But I think it's possible that if the series goes deep, that one of those guys comes back. They're dealing with grade 2 injuries, Luka to his hamstring, Reeves to his oblique. That's typically a 4 to 6 week timetable, but 4 weeks is entirely reasonable, even in the regular season. We saw Tari Eason cleared to return from his grade 2 oblique after exactly 4 weeks earlier this season. So if this gets to a game 6 or a game 7, and the first round is spaced out, the only date we have confirmed is Saturday's game 1, but based on historical precedent, you're likely to have a game every 3 days rather than every 2 days for the most part. It's going to be close to 4 weeks by the time game 6 and game 7 roll around. So it's entirely possible that at least one of those guys, not confirmed, but very possible, could come back. And I wouldn't put it past, given the added stakes of the playoffs, I wouldn't say it's impossible to return as early as game 3 or game 4, which would be around the 3-week mark, because of the added incentive, the desperation. Now, would they be 100% by that point? Even with the European treatment, almost certainly not. But at the same time, something is better than nothing. It could provide an emotional jolt. So the advantage the Rockets have from a talent perspective going into this series, it could erode by the end of the series, because I'm just not convinced that it's a given that both of those guys aren't going to return. I think if I had to bet, if the series goes 6 or 7 games, my money is on at least one of those guys playing at some point in this series. So that's not to give the Rockets an excuse. It's to highlight how much of a sense of urgency there should be to taking care of business early in the series, to establishing the sense of inevitability that you're going to advance and not giving the Lakers hope. And that plays into the micro. My concern is that the Rockets this year have had a tendency to play with their food, to play down to the competition. And if the Lakers steal a game or two early in this series, and it looks like it's going to go 6 or 7, that's where there's a path for them to steal this series. If they can get one of those two guys back, they get the emotional lip, you get to a one-game scenario, and LeBron looks at it as a potential late career legacy moment. The Rockets need to establish themselves as the dominant team early in this series. And I think JJ Redick is a good coach at mucking it up. We saw in that first game between the Rockets and the Lakers. Now, granted, the first game in Houston when Şengün wasn't out there, and that's an important distinction, but they really gummed up the Rockets offense in the fourth quarter, forced some terrible turnovers. Kevin Durant looked lost in terms of how he wanted to attack. And, you know, if you squint hard enough, there's some things they could do in the half court. You could have Marcus Smart guard Şengün at times, the way we've seen some smaller, stockier guys like Grant Williams, Stephon Castle have a bit of success with quick hands, more strength in their lower body than you expect. And that would allow the Lakers to sash their big, DeAndre Ayton or Jackson Hayes on a men and sort of float back, sag back into the paint. You could perhaps have LeBron on Josh Okogie or Tari Eason if he's not making shots, and use LeBron in something of a free safety mode as well. And the Rockets should be able to find counters over 7 games. And so if you told me 100% that Luka and Reeves were out for the series, I'd say, you know, barring catastrophic injuries, the Rockets should be fine because over 7 games, they'll figure it out. But over the course of a season, like, they haven't always had a super high sense of urgency. And so I could see a world where, especially early in the series in LA, it takes them a little longer than we would like to adapt, be it from a coaching perspective or just the players on the court, whoever you want to blame. They have not always been quick to adapt this year. Like, there are definitely counters, even in this scenario where I give the Lakers the benefit of the doubt and JJ's able to muck it up in the half court. Okay, then play with more pace, get out in transition, use the Christmas model, use that as the template. And maybe you have to insert Reed Shepherd so that you have a second ball handler that makes it easier to push pace and get to the weak spots of, you know, the quasi zone or whatever the Lakers are playing defensively. Well, do it. I mean, there's concerns about Reed defensively and how the pairing goes with Şengün. Well, for starters, you can play Clint Capella instead of Şengün. Capella should have a revenge series against DeAndre Ayton. But beyond that, I also don't think, you know, the Lakers having shooters instead of scorers, when you take out Luka and Reeves, I don't know if the Lakers have the guys who can really punish Reed Shepherd defensively in a way that most teams would. Quite frankly, I would be open to starting Reed Shepherd in this series. And I'm surprised I'm saying that because for most of, you know, the final month or so, I've said I would start Josh or Tari. I'm not saying it's a clear-cut case, but against this specific Lakers team, and when you look at how they can beat you, I find it very hard to see the Lakers being able to score enough points if the Rockets are able to get out in transition and score before the Lakers can consistently set their defense, which having a second ball handler would allow the Rockets to do. So that's a potential counter. It's not that there aren't trade-offs because, you know, the defensive data on Reed and Şengün is real. He's also 21 years old, year 2. We'll see what he looks like on the biggest stage. Didn't really play in the playoffs last year. So, you know, it's not to say that it's a slam dunk decision for Ime Udoka, but at the same time, like, sometimes it doesn't all come together immediately. And this is a series where if the Rockets don't make these adjustments in short order, the Lakers can steal a game. And if they're able to, you know, feel confident that this series gets to, you know, at least a game 6 and hopefully a game 7, then everything can change because the advantage that you have with those 2 injured guys goes away if the Lakers are able to feel confident that this series is going to go on a while. So that's my micro concern. Can the Lakers do some things early in the series to gum up the works for the Rockets offense in the half court? It's been an issue at times. And if they do, will the Rockets, will Ime Udoka, will they be able to adjust on the fly quickly enough to have those counters before the Lakers can put a win in their column and inherently extend the series? If you could guarantee me that Luka and Reeves aren't going back, I'd say it's nothing to worry about because over 7 games, the Rockets will definitely have the counters. But in this case, there is an incentive to have the counters more quickly. At times this year, they have not. So it's something in the back of my mind. I'm personally not expecting it. I do think the Rockets will win this series, although we'll have a prediction segment a little bit later. But if you want to squint hard enough and search for a way that the Lakers could have a path in this series, taking one of those first two games at home in LA, chipping away at the notion of inevitability, and having JJ Redick do in the fourth quarter what he did in the fourth quarter of that first game in Houston a month ago. To me, that's the template. Paulo, I know I've gone on a while, but that's sort of my high-level overview of what concerns me about this series. If you're looking at it from a Rockets perspective, what could go wrong besides hashtag Houston sports and an over 27 type performance? Aside from something crazy like that, what are the semi-realistic scenarios where this thing could go south and it could be a lot more stressful than we would like?
Well, it's not that hard to imagine. I've said throughout the entire season that this team's not elite defensively or elite offensively, and they don't seem to have that extra gear to kick into. And that's teams that are elite at one thing are exactly how you beat other flawed teams, or teams that are extremely short-handed. Last year's Rockets would just not allow the Lakers to score. They'd score 70, 80 points a game, and then out of like how often would a team that is not filled with defensive specialists, and the Lakers aren't? I mean, I'm not even sure if they have one plus defender on the team right now. Maybe Jared Vanderbilt off the top of my head. That's how if I had confidence on the Rockets to be consistently very good defensively, I'd feel a lot more comfortable. If I had confidence on the Rockets being consistently very good offensively, I'd feel a lot better as well. Now, how does it happen? It happens the same way the Rockets lost games to the Pelicans, or the same way the Rockets lost games to the Timberwolves when Ant's not playing, and the same way the Rockets have lost games all season long to teams that are a lot worse than them. And I don't necessarily think it was always a question of underestimating their opponents. I think sometimes it's just that this team doesn't really have a true identity. I think that's how it goes wrong. If this turns out to be a more balanced series than we are expecting it to be or hoping it would be, I think there's some stuff that the Rockets can try to go to try and even it out before, or try to get an extra advantage before Luka and Reeves potentially come back. It's like the second best offensive player on the Lakers is very clearly Rui Hachimura from a shot creating perspective. And I think he's exactly the type of guy you're okay having Alperen Şengün guard, for example. Do you go back to double big because they're going to lean very heavily on the LeBron Aiden pick and roll? Do you slot Capella back into the starting lineup to match Aiden, especially from the perspective of being a lob threat, which is Şengün's weak point by a mile, and LeBron James is tailor-made to take advantage of that, especially from a decision-making standpoint? I think that's something that we may see. We may see double big even without a competent big to come off the bench. Because I think the biggest thing is, I don't think LeBron James by himself can beat you, knock on wood, at this point in his career. But I do think you could see Luke Kennard go for 30 and shoot 10 threes. I think you could see Rui Hachimura catch fire. He's a very good shooter at this point in his career. And he has a little bit of a post game. I mean, coming into the league, he was a versatile player. He wasn't a role player type. Was more of a Kyle Kuzma type, I would say. So I think there's ways the Rockets can adjust. I don't think it's and anybody who's a Rockets fan or a fan of Houston sports in general, or back in Portugal in my country, I don't know if you have. I mean, I do know we have some Portuguese listeners. I'm a Sporting fan back then, and then everybody knows what people say about Sporting. They find a way to, like, the most improbable way for stuff to go wrong. Sporting finds a way to have that stuff go wrong, at least historically. And Houston sports is not that different. And you pay the exact scenario that I'm worried about, which is it gets murky depending on the injuries. And if there's a chance that Luka comes back game 6 or game 7, Luka's gonna come back game 6 or game 7. And he might be limited, but against the Rockets, he just seems to find another gear. And it doesn't really matter. Like, he always goes full magnet ball on us. And then there is very much, and the Rockets are like the exact type of team to take it easy in games 1 and 2 because they're playing away and not go full throttle and let it extend into a 6-game series or a 7-game series and have those guys come back. Like, that's exactly how it happens. That's exactly how you lose a series like this. Now, I think a lot will be told by the result of game 1. And you said this on the last pod, which is it's actually really good for the Rockets that they play the Lakers at home or in LA before they play at home, because then it's guaranteed that Luka and Reeves won't be there, and hopefully you can get the first 2 games, yeah, and hopefully you can get too big of an advantage that even if they were to come back, they likely wouldn't, because it's already 3-0, right? Or it's already 3-1, and they might not think that it's worth it because, especially with hamstring injuries, which is what Luka has, those we know by experience that those are the ones you re-aggravate and then take a while to come back from, and sometimes don't come back from fully back to the explosiveness you had before. Even though Luka is not necessarily that explosive of a player as athletically, but yeah, that's exactly how it happens, and I can't in good faith put that aside completely because, well, we've watched this team, and this team finds ways to have the worst case scenario materialize, but they definitely have, weapons that they could use to counter it. But to me, it's gonna be mostly an attitude type of thing. And if Şengün's locked in defensively, I think that goes along. And Şengün and KD especially are locked in defensively, which I think they will be in the playoffs, especially KD. Then you win the first 2 games, and that's series. I think if you win the first 2 games, there's zero shot that you lose afterwards. Mostly because of the psychological toll that it takes on the other team. And yes, they do have LeBron James, and LeBron James has been through it all. But I think even he, at this stage in his career, not necessarily going to turn into, full playoff, lock-in mode. Because I think going into the series, if the first 2 games are just confirming what you're already expecting for the series, I think mentally it's a different kind of playing field.
And there was a parallel to your point with Luka coming back late in the year, or late in the series, from a hamstring injury, which is notoriously easy to re-aggravate. That Warriors-Timberwolves series I referenced, when Steph Curry strained his hamstring in game 1, I think that was a grade 1 or grade 1.5. There was hope that he could come back by game 6 or game 7, but that made it all the more important for the Timberwolves to take care of business, which they did, to a point where it just wasn't worth it to try and expedite the process and bring him back. And what happened? The Timberwolves won the next 3 games. They had a 3-1 lead that felt insurmountable going back to Minnesota. And the Warriors at that point just couldn't justify bringing back a player of that stature down 3-1, even if you couldn't say 100% that he would re-injure it. It just, the potential reward was so small that they weren't going to push the envelope. So I think it's a similar situation here, in that those early series games are all the more important, because if you can put that sense of inevitability into the Lakers, I think it's going to make them a little bit less likely to do something crazy and give Luka a chance to, I say defy the odds, but honestly, I mean, players like that do it all the time. There's a reason that he's already a Hall of Famer, in my opinion. So I would rather not have the Lakers with that sense of hope, and taking care of business early in the series would do that. Paulo, quick follow-up. I mentioned being open to starting Reed Shepherd for potentially pushing the pace a bit more and having a second ball handler to attack any gimmicky defenses that Redick might throw out. You mentioned Clint Capella and the double big, which I hadn't considered. I feel like on paper, Josh Okogie or Tari Eason is probably the favorite, because the high leverage games the last 2 weeks of the season, looking at the Knicks, the 2 final ones, the Timberwolves that Friday when they stuck Okogie on Anthony Edwards, the second half of the Phoenix game, the Philadelphia game where there was Maxey and Edgecombe, that was either Okogie or Tari Eason. Actually, it was all Okogie other than the Knicks game, which was Tari Eason. So I feel like, just looking at who started the most impactful games and also the second half in Phoenix down the stretch of the year, you'd say that Ime Udoka probably wants to start either Okogie or Tari as the 5th guy. But, this series and how unique it is, and also being in a rare position as a favorite, it might force you to think a little bit outside the box. I mentioned Reed. You mentioned Capella. If it was strictly your choice, Paulo, game 1 Saturday night, who is your 5th starter alongside Amen Thompson, Jabari Smith, Kevin Durant, and Alfred Şengün?
I'd go with Okogie, and
okay.
it's what I expect Ime Udoka to do. I think I think you go into those gimmicky type of things once you see that you need to.
Wait for it to happen.
Right. Yeah, wait for it to happen doesn't necessarily mean wait to lose round one, to lose game one. You can make the adjustment at halftime if you see that you're getting absolutely cooked in the pick and roll with Aiden and LeBron. But going into it, I think that's an adjustment, not something you pull off right off the bat. Especially because if they can, if they aren't able to use LeBron, Aiden to punish you against your normal team, then there's no need for you to give up what you are giving up offensively by playing a little big, because obviously the offensive rebounding is not as big of an edge as it is with Steven Adams, and the overall finishing at the rim, Steven's a lot better than Capella, and even passing out. Steven's just better than Capella at basically everything. But yeah, you only take the downside offensively once it's proven that there is an upside defensively that the Lakers are punishing Şengün and in the pick and roll with a lot of threats. Yeah. So yeah, going into it, I'd just go status quo, and I'm 100% sure that that's what Ime Udoka is going to do. Even if I thought otherwise, I would even if I believe that you should go with one of the more gimmicky lineups, I would still say it's 100% that Ime Udoka goes status quo.
And then quickly, from an X factor perspective, I don't want to be accused of being too negative. We've talked a lot about how things could go wrong. Let's talk about how things could go right. A variable that would almost 100% swing this series in favor of the Rockets. And there's a lot of little things you can point to. I think, Kevin Durant, as good as he is, needs to limit the turnovers in a way he didn't in that first Lakers game last month. But the big one for me is Alperen Şengün. I just feel like Ime Thompson down the home stretch of this year was so dominant, capped by the career-high 41 we saw in his last game against the Timberwolves. I know the Rockets, that was their lone loss in their final 10 games, but that was an ungodly performance from three-point range by the Timberwolves. So you want to talk about magnet ball, that was the epitome of it. Ime Thompson has been so good down the stretch of this year. I would argue that considering offense and defense, he's been at least a top 20, maybe a top 15 player in the league over the final 10 or 15 games. He's been that good. And I feel like if you combine Kevin Durant with that version of Ime Thompson, there's just no way the shorthanded Lakers are going to have enough. Maybe they have magnet ball shooting enough to win one game, but there's no way they can come close to winning 4 times out of 7. Now, the only way that you wouldn't have that version of Ime Thompson is if the Lakers are able to do something gimmicky like we saw the Spurs do. Now, has to be said, the Lakers have nothing close to Victor Wembanyama, but they can certainly try some things. Like I mentioned earlier, having their bigs and/or LeBron roam more free safety style coverages to take away the driving lanes. And we know Ime, he has gotten better at the mid-range shot in recent weeks, but certainly there's no long-range shot, at least not consistently. So when we talk about these gimmicky defenses that the Lakers can try, the reason teams will go to these gimmicks against the Rockets is by and large to take away the driving lanes for Ime Thompson. Well, in this series, with the Lakers having no one close to Victor Wembanyama, there is no way that those types of gimmicky defenses are going to work if the Rockets get the right version of Alperen Şengün. I mentioned the Lakers trying to stash, Marcus Smart as a short, stocky, quick hands guy against Şengün, try to follow the Grant Williams, Stephon Castle type template. If Şengün goes to work and feast against a guy that's more than a half foot shorter than him, I don't see how the Lakers can win this series. And that's before we even talk about the defensive end, as you just did, Paulo. Throughout the year, Şengün's effort level on defense, the Rockets go as far as he can take them on that end of the court. So if he can be, closer to the net neutral guy he was defensively a year ago, even a slight positive as opposed to the clear negative he's been for most of this year. I mean, we said that all season long. That's a huge variable. But then offensively, I just feel like any of these gimmicks that they might throw out to try and slow down Ime Thompson to make him not the version we saw down the home stretch of this year, they leave a clear path for Alperen Şengün. And if he goes out and handles his business against, defenders that are probably smaller than him, certainly not as good overall, there's no true rim protection there, I just don't think the Lakers can win this series. I don't think they can come close to winning 4 times out of 7. So for me, in terms of positive X factors, I'm looking at Alperen Şengün. If he goes out there and handles his business, the Rockets should be just fine. Paulo, outside of Şengün, that might be boring if we both pick the same guy. Who are you looking at as, I guess, an X factor for this series in a positive way?
Well, I was gonna say Şengün for all of the reasons that
Sorry.
you enlisted. It's just, but I'll make the case for someone else. Even just offensively, if the Rockets have KD, who's going to be KD, it doesn't matter, and Şengün, I don't think that that's any way that the Lakers can just keep up offensively, and so the defense isn't necessarily too much of an issue, even though that if he steps up on both ends, it's a 4-game sweep. Beyond that, I could make the case for Amen Thompson, but I don't think it's necessary. I don't think we need a man to be more than what he was throughout the entire regular season to beat the Lakers. And I don't think him being that much better changes that much, because he can really only be better offensively, because I think defensively, he's going to do the job that can be done on LeBron even at this age. Never going to lock down LeBron just too crafty. So to me, it's between the two guys that are competing for the 5th starting spot, whether that's Okogie, whether that's Tari. I think you know what you're going to get out of Jabari. I think he performed well last postseason as well. It's just, will Okogie and Tari be able to knock down shots and prevent the Lakers from just stashing LeBron on that 5th guy? Because the way the Lakers beat the Rockets is by playing some style of flawed defense that's easily exploitable if 4 guys can shoot and be okay on defense. And if you take that away, then there's just really there's no reasonable way the Lakers could pose a threat defensively to the Rockets offense if everybody's knocking down their shots. So the X factor is, can you put 5 guys out there, or 4 guys, Porzapper and Şengün, who can all knock down their shots at a consistent level? Not necessarily saying shooting 40% from 3, just saying don't shoot 1 for 10 and then 5 for 10 the game afterwards, right? That would be, that would be an okay 3-point percentage. Well, that would be close to an okay 3-point percentage. But it would cost you a game. And in the playoffs, that's what you need: consistency throughout. You don't need really high highs and really lows, because you are a better team than the Lakers. So if the 5th guy, whoever it is, Tari or Okogie, are knocking down their shots, I think it gets just really impossible for the Rockets to lose the series.
And to your point on Tari Eason, if you watch this team down the stretch of this year, even though the overall 3-point percentage still finished, I think, fairly healthy, I want to say 36, 37%, when he went through his stretch where he was cold and in individual games where he was, 1 of 7, 1 of 8, teams were leaving him. And I think that's the point that you're making, that if in a game a guy like that is really cold, it doesn't matter that you look at the season-long data and say, oh, he can shoot a respectable clip, or even the overall series total is at a respectable clip. If he's 1 of 7, 1 of 8, and defenses can just leave him alone in the corner and not fear that the Rockets are going to make them pay, that's where those gimmicky defenses can have more success. So I see where you're coming from on that, and I think it is important to look at performances within each game for that reason, because even though we can sit here and analytically look at the numbers for the series overall or for the season overall and say, well, this is what should happen, in terms of spacing, in terms of the impact on a given possession, it doesn't always work that way. There can be variance based on who's hitting, who's not in a given game. And I think, to your point, which is quite valid, if the Rockets are making shots across the board and at least at a level to where the defense has to think twice about leaving someone, I guess, other than Şengün, although Şengün did have a few games down the stretch of the year where he made 3, so knock on wood, hopefully that continues, but I think you take that as a bonus. If the Rockets are just making enough shots to where the Lakers can't completely forget about certain guys and certain spaces on the court, then, yeah, Houston should score enough points to where the Lakers, at least a shorthanded version, can't keep up. All right, quickly, our predictions. I'm going Rockets in 6. That might sound conservative, but I can't help it. The Rockets have played with their food too much this season, and especially if they go up 3-1, it's tough for me to see the Rockets with an advantage closing the door in their first opportunity, especially if it's on the road where they were just 22-19 this season. And if it gets to Game 5, as I mentioned earlier, there's the possibility that at least one of Luka or Reeves is able to come back. So I could see this being a scenario where the Rockets are good but not perfect the first 4 games, take 3 or 4, they have a hiccup somewhere, and then they lose a road Game 5 because they haven't always been good at, having that killer instinct, so to speak, and then they finish the deal in Game 6 back in Houston. I will say that will make us sweat because if this thing gets to a Game 7 in LA, it would be a legacy moment for LeBron. It would be very possible that at least one, if not both, of the two injured Lakers guys come back. At that point, it would feel inevitable almost that the Lakers would find a way. So I think if the Rockets are going to win this series, it probably needs to be in 6 games or less. And similar to the season overall, I don't think they'll make it easy on themselves, but I do think they'll get it done. They're simply the better team. And so I think they win 4-2, move on to face the Thunder, and we'll talk about that series when it comes in a couple of weeks. Paulo, what's your pick?
Against my better judgment, I'm going to go Rockets in 4.
Oh, I like it. That's spicy, man.
Yeah, I think they're going to surprise us, and I think that the Lakers just don't have enough to take a game off the Rockets, and I think after they lose the first 2 games, they just give up.
Yeah, that's the hope. And I'm in complete agreement there. Those first 2 games are so important on so many fronts because you have an opportunity. That's the scenario where not having home court advantage could actually work out well for you, and that you get the 2 games that 100% they're not going to have Reeves or Luka. I mean, technically they'll be reevaluated next week, according to JJ Redick, but they're not going to go from a reevaluation to playing that night. It would take at least a few days of ramping up. So yeah, they're not going to play the first 2 games, which will be Saturday and either Monday or Tuesday in all likelihood. We'll see what happens after that. But if you can establish that sense of inevitability, then yeah, this thing might end sooner rather than later. And, we've spent a lot of this pod and really a lot of the season talking about, the problems with the Rockets, but to give them credit, they did win 9 of their last 10 games. They were able to finally stack games down the home stretch of the year. So knock on wood, maybe they finally have turned a corner.
Let me ask you a different question. What is the worst case scenario?
The worst case scenario is that they lose the home game 1. Or that they lose the road game 1, home for the Lakers, and the narrative of this series gets completely turned on its head. I don't think that the Lakers are going to run away with it. Like, if somehow the Lakers won the series in 4 or 5, like, barring, like, an insane amount of injuries, something went catastrophically wrong. I'm just not willing to go there until we see it. To me, the realistic worst-case scenario is that, the Lakers, national TV, spotlight game, rallying around the idea that nobody believes in us, to use a Bill Simmonsism, stealing a game early, building the belief that, and also, building the doubt in the Rockets, which we've seen at times this year, just expecting the other shoe to drop in high leverage situations, and just making it to where the Rockets' margin of error, like if the Rockets lose game 1, they need to win at least 4 of the next 5 games. Well, 4 of the next 5, can't win more than that, but you need to win 4 out of the next 5, or else there would be a game 7. And for the reasons I just laid out, I would not like the Rockets' chances in a road game 7 against LeBron and the Lakers. So losing that home game 1, raising the hopes in LA, and, just bringing that doubt back into the equation for the Rockets, who at times have been a mentally fragile team this year, that's my fear. And so if the Rockets go out and handle their business on Saturday night, I will feel so much better. I wouldn't put it past them, even if they do that, to, potentially lay an egg in game 2 because they, get a little too high on themselves. That would not shock me with this team, but I could handle that a lot more and say, you know what, they've learned their lesson, they know what they need to do, and then they'll handle their business back in Houston. If they get punched in the mouth in game 1 after a week off and having time for their, high minutes guys to rest up, that's the scenario where I feel like doubt would start to enter the equation. That's the worst case for me.
Man, your worst case seems pretty mild. I had 2 cases that are worse than that. The first one is getting swept in 4.
God. I'm just not going there. No, of course it's possible, but I'm just not going there.
The worst one, though, even like I would prefer getting swept in 4 rather than this one. The worst one, and this will always be my fear going into the playoff series, is being the first team ever to lose after being up 3-0. That's the rock bottom. Like, once an NBA team does that, like, I think it just disbands the franchise. Like, if you're the first one in history to lose after being up 3-0, I remember the Celtics and the Heat a few years back. They almost, like, one of them, I don't remember who was coming. I think it was the Heat coming back. Or was it the Celtics coming back? I think it was the Celtics coming back, where they lost the first 3 games, took it to game 7, and then lost the game 7. But yeah, that's my worst case scenario. Well, and this is very much a situation that would present itself for that to happen. because of the Luka and Reeves potentially coming back in the latter stages of the series.
Yeah. Well, I'm not, for the sake of positivity, I'm not willing to go there yet. I will say, #Houston Sports, we have had some recent history on the Astros side, becoming the first team to lose 4 home playoff games in a single series, not once, but twice, the 2019 World Series and then the 2023 ALCS against the hated Rangers. Now, that's not quite as embarrassing as it sounds because honestly, there haven't been that many teams with a chance to lose 4 games in a series because typically if you lose your first 3 home games, the only way you would have a fourth is if you're good enough to then go 3-0 on the road to force a game 7. So while it's certainly history, it's not quite as, peak futility as you would think at face value simply because other teams would have lost 4 games at home. It's just they didn't get to play 4 games at home because they had already lost the road games, at least one of them beforehand. But nonetheless, it is history. It's happened in recent #Houston Sports. So until it doesn't happen, yeah, I'm right there with you. You can't entirely rule it out. Anyway, I will rule it out for today. Not going down that road far because we're already an hour in, and let's be positive for a change. Rockets have won 9 of the last 10 games. They got a favorable playoff draw, so we'll punt those dire scenarios back until at least the Rockets lose a game and we're forced to, explore some suboptimal outcomes. And we'll see if that's the case when we next record, which will be early next week. Not sure if it will be between game 1 and game 2 or between game 2 and game 3. That's because the full schedule is to be determined. We'll try and do it in a spot in the schedule where there's a couple of consecutive off days, so the pod has a slightly longer shelf life. But regardless, either between game 1 and game 2 or between game 2 and game 3, we will be back early next week, so stay tuned for that. I'll also have the post-game shows and perhaps a preview as well with Dave Hardesty over on the Clutch Fans YouTube channel. All right, for tonight, I think we're done. And if you want more content before our next show, the best place to get it is at LaunchPod790 on Twitter/X, where if you go to the link tree in the bio, you can find links to friends, partners, sponsors, Clutch Fans, Sports Talk 790, USA Today's Rockets Bar. I mentioned the Clutch Fans YouTube page where we have the live shows. And then you can also follow Paulo and myself on social media, Paulo at Paulo Alves NBA, and me at Ben DuBose. All right, with that, I believe we're done for today. For Paulo Alves, I'm Ben DuBose. As always, we appreciate you guys and girls so much for listening, and please come back soon for more new episodes of the Rockets Launch Pod. Go Rockets.